is Chutes Folly Island. Castle Pinckney is the name of the brick fort on the island. It's named in honor of Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, an author and signer of the United States Constitution, and cousin of Charles Pinckney of Sneak Farm, a local National Park Service site in Mount Pleasant. The current fortification on Chutes Folly Island was built in 1809 to 1810. However, it played no active role until 1860. In December of that year, it was virtually undefended. But when Union Major Robert Anderson moved his garrison from Fort Moultrie across the channel to Fort Sumter, this was viewed by many South Carolinians as an act of war. In retaliation, on the next day, December 27, 1860, approximately 150 South Carolina militia captured Castle Pinckney without incident. Maintained throughout the war, it played a minor role in the defenses of Charleston Harbor. It briefly served as a prison for Union soldiers captured at Manassas in 1861. Castle Pinckney is now owned by a local camp of Sons of Confederate Veterans.
program is to the right, just past it. Yeah. Yeah, depends on the cannon. So this one in particular, this 42 pounder, has a range of about 1.5 miles. This is also a 42 pounder that got modernized. It got rifled, which means they chuck the grooves into it, and then it got that thick band around the back. And that bumped it up to like a little over 2 miles, 2.1 miles. Most of the cannons out there are going to have a range of 2.5 miles. And then once you go around to the other side of the water, it's going to go on 5 miles.
Looks like we've got just about everyone. First ranking again, for my friends who are still outside, you're welcome to stay there, but there is more cover on location. Alright, if you want to start training, you want to get out of the ring. So, before I get started, I'm going to answer a question for you guys. A question that most of you are going to have that I'm not going to address at all during my talk. And that's, what is that big black monstrosity behind you? That is Battery Isaac Bugie, built in 1899 to take advantage of brand new gun technology. The concept battery Bugie, one on either side of where our bookstore is, could very accurately hit targets more than 9 miles away with a 1,000-pound shell. The distance between us and the center of the big bridge in downtown Charleston is about 4 miles. So they can see it from here, they can hit it. It's black because when the Army built it, they coated it with tar and linseed oil and waterproof and camouflage. So with that out of the way, welcome everybody to Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie National Historical Park. My name is Tim, and on behalf of the National Park Service, I'm personally very grateful to have you out here on a beautiful day here in Charleston Harbor. Before I get rocking and rolling, though, I have a question for you. So, more than a million casualties, so current estimate about 3/4 dead. Another, I think, probably 2 to 3 times as many wounded for every man dead. So you're probably looking at 1.5 million Yeah, that was. Yeah, so current scholarship placed that number closer to 750,000. Okay, that's interesting. I think the American Battlefield Trust listed it total casualties of something like 1.5 million. Yeah, and casualties, like I said, are not just deaths, the wounds as well. Yeah. Oh yeah.
See these big indentations in the brick where I'm guessing they took fire. Very small. course, it's sunny now. Weather predicted 100% chance of rain. That's why I also couldn't bring the kind of protector for the camera to block out the wind so it wouldn't be waterproof. Oh well. Red line is how high the walls used to be. Is that the one that shot? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
You got me. Exchange and Provost dungeon, where you see the flags. It's where George Washington himself stood and addressed crowds for the week that he was in Charleston. This building was built between 1767 and 1771, predating the United States by 5 years. Crazy. Let's check it out.
No, I mean, I just don't know about that. Because I remember thinking she looked funny dressed when I was on tour.
Hello.
Would you like to go to the museum?
I would, of course.
I can help you right over here. See what time it is. We have an 11:30 dungeon tour.
Ship named the Carolina got anchor on the west bank of the Ashley River in an area that's referred to today as Charlestown Landing, and was
was there for the first 20 years that they attempted to establish their community with less than ideal results. Mostly because at that time, that location was upriver from the harbor that made trading and mostly supply in the area. It was a little bit more difficult than they had anticipated. So, in 1690, following the advice of some Native Americans that they'd befriended here in the area, they packed up their community, lock, stock, and barrel, and relocated it all to the peninsula. And when they arrived here, they discovered that they had some different challenges they had to consider. The first one being that the pirates were already in the area. They loved coming and using the harbor as a place to hide out after they'd been raiding shipping on the open seas. But they also discovered that the Spanish, as well as the French, were looking to establish themselves in the Carolinas. So they certainly deemed it necessary to construct some fortifications. And the fortifications that they came up with was no
It's the original seawall of Charlestown, built in 1680.
All right. So when we think about tea and we think about American history, most everybody's thoughts turn to the Boston Tea Party. And that is rather natural because that's what we've all studied in American history coming up through school. Well, here in Charlestown, we had our own bit of a tea event, although it didn't involve throwing tea over the side of the ship, nor did it involve setting the tea on fire like they did in Baltimore and burned the ship to the waterline. Instead, here in Charlestown, the shopkeepers and the Sons of Liberty, a patriotic group, met on our second floor here, and they had a little bit of a discussion as to how they wanted to proceed with the King's Tea. They came to the conclusion that the easiest solution was a boycott. That's not all that necessarily easy, but nonetheless, that boycott meant they weren't going to handle the King's Tea, they weren't going to buy or consume any of the King's Tea. Doesn't mean, though, that they did without any tea, because there was a fair amount of smuggling that went along as well. So they did get that supply of tea, just didn't have the King's stamp on it. They didn't have to pay taxes either. Well, now, with the boycott, the next three ships arrived here in December of 1773 laden with tea, and they dropped anchor just off the exchange building, but no one from shore went out to unload those ships. And they sat there for several days until such time as the Boston Tea Party did take place up in Massachusetts. Now, I feel like we got overlooked in the history books with our boycott. More than likely, it's the result of the newspapers and publishing houses generally being at that time located in the Northeast colonies. I'm also going to, for the sake of argument, assume that the early history books were probably written by Yale and Harvard grads, so maybe that bias comes that way as well. At any rate, we're very proud nonetheless that our boycott preceded the Tea Party. Now, those three ships were still sitting just off the exchange building for several more days after the Boston Tea Party had happened, and it wasn't until the sailing masters of those vessels ordered their own crews to unload the ships that they brought 238 crates of tea in the cellar and left it here for safekeeping. And here that tea actually remained for the next 3 years. Now, during that 3-year time frame, there were a couple of significant events that occurred, the first one coming in September of 1775. That is when the British governor of Charlestown made what is most likely the worst career decision of his life. That's when he decided to go back to England. And when he left, he took every one of the British soldiers in town with him, which meant that anything they couldn't take with them, they left behind, abandoned, and unprotected, including all that tea here in the cellar. Now, the following year, on August 5th of 1776, the Declaration of Independence made its way from Philadelphia to Charlestown. It was read here on the Bay Street side of our building by Governor John Rutledge, and when the reading was completed, it was executed by 4 representatives of South Carolina, which officially involved us in the fight for independence. Now, all the tea that was still here in the cellar, and they'd been very faithful boycotting the tea even after the governor had gone back to England. Well, all that tea, mysteriously, after the last I's were dotted and the last T's were crossed in those 4 signatures, made its way out of the cellar and finally into the city markets. And there it was being sold on a regular basis, and sold quite readily, as a matter of fact. And it was after they completed the selling of all that tea they basically stole from King George, they also used the funding that they got from selling all that tea to pay the expenses to fight for independence from King George. So a little ironic they used his own money to give him that particular right. And if you're curious as to what kind of value there was to 238 crates of tea, well, I can't give you a 1776 figure, but I will let you know that today's value would be somewhere around $750,000. So they certainly must have had a fairly significant fund to begin paying those expenses. Now that over the next 4 years, King George was certainly missing the revenue that he had been collecting from the exchange building previous to the governor going back, and he ordered the city to be retaken on a couple of different occasions. Both those attempts actually were rather miserable failures. It wasn't until, though, April of 1780 that General Charles Lord Cornwallis began himself a southern campaign. And he set sail from New York Harbor with several ships laden with British troops, and as they made landfall in South Carolina, they began a 42-day siege of the city of Charlestown. Now, during that siege, he certainly had the availability of the British Navy at his disposal, and the harbor, they bombarded the city at his command. During one of those bombardments, a shell actually landed perilously close to the powder magazine that is still located on Cumberland. And with that, our Colonel William Moultrie, stationed at Fort Sumter, ordered all colonial black powder in the area accumulated and brought to one centralized location. And that location being the exchange building. And in this corner behind me, they stashed away just a little bit more than 7 tons of black powder altogether. And when they had it secured there, they put up the brick wall in front of it, hoping against hope that would be enough of a disguise that the British wouldn't realize there was anything hidden there. Matter of fact, it worked out rather nicely to what Moultrie had in mind, mostly because at that time, the British had no one in the frontline troops that knew a thing about architecture. Because that brick wall represents that second anomaly to the 2 themes of symmetry that I mentioned in the cellar. There is no matching wall like that elsewhere in the cellar here. It exists as a singularity in a building full of duplication. But because the British didn't know what they were looking at, it passed off rather nicely. In fact, the British helped out the whole situation, and that certainly wasn't intentional, but as they occupied the city of Charlestown, they made use of the exchange building itself as their military headquarters. But more particularly, they made use of the center portion of the cellar here as their Provost jail. And to accomplish that, they put up a temporary wall, this archway, consisting of crates and barrels, bags of rocks or sand, whatever they could find, and they effectively isolated this entire corner of the cellar from access. But more important than that, they also restricted anybody's or eliminated anybody's use or ability to inspect the area. So for the 2.5 years that they were in the cellar as the Provost jail, they were literally 40 feet away from 7 tons of black powder, yet at the same time were completely oblivious to the fact that it even existed. So in December of 1782, when the British were forced from the city of Charlestown, Moultrie returned with his troops, knocked open that brick wall to find the 7 tons of black powder, exactly where they left it for safekeeping back in 1780 in May of that year. In fact, they had to dig down a little bit to get all that black powder in the area, and so the bottom 2 tons with some seepage of some groundwater, it was wet, the top 5 tons were fine. Perfectly dry and suitable for firing cannons and muskets at the British. They certainly put to good use doing exactly that and helped drive the British out of South Carolina once and for all. As a matter of fact, at the last and worst defeat that the British suffered in South Carolina, at the Battle of Cowpens, South Carolina, just up the way here, they actually went limping home pretty badly because we find out just not a few months later that Cornwallis is surrendering to Washington at Yorktown, effectively ending our fight for independence. So now, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, I'm not bothered by movement. I'm going to continue talking about my Provost jail here, but yes, I do want you to have the opportunity to step up there. Watch your footing. There is a little recess. Yep, right in there. But take a look in the window there, and you'll notice the fellows are working back there without any kind of shoes or boots on their feet. Mostly because at that time, Nike, Reebok, and Adidas weren't widely available. They generally wore leather shoes or boots, and those happened to be held together with metal hobnails.